Hello everyone, this is Surreality or Polaris here, and yes, it's been a while since my last video, but I'm hoping to at least be able to get one out every single month, at the very least, because I think that's fair, but we'll see how that goes. And also, as you can tell on screen, I am playing a different game. This is Only Up, which I think is a very fitting game for this month because it's been pretty popular and I've seen a lot of people playing it. It's definitely a pretty difficult game. It is mechanically atrocious. The physics of it are so scary that you are never really sure about the movements that you're doing. I mean, clearly the speedrunners are, but I think the average person is afraid that even taking a single step will result in them sliding off objects and just, shooting into the atmosphere. But still, a game that I think is somewhat fun, and it's only $10, so it's not too bad of a price for a fairly long game. I mean, for its length, even speedrunning it compared to some of the other, like Getting Over It and Pogo Stuck, I think this game is actually on the longer side. At least, again, until anyone finds any crazier skips, but I think the world record right now is at like 23 minutes, so still pretty long game for the type of genre it is. But let's jump into the juicy stuff. There's really two main topics I want to talk about for this video, and it kind of goes in accordance with all the stuff that's happening this month. And so the first one is, obviously, it's June, so it's Pride Month, right? So we all get to see the companies change their logos to the rainbow, which I guess is cool. I do like rainbows for sure. But also, a little annoying because most of them are just doing it because it's good PR and stuff like that or whatever. They don't really care. Which is unfortunate, but it's how it is. But, diversity and inclusion is like a whole part of this month, but it kind of is annoying, and we'll get to it about how it being tied to a month, and I don't know how other people feel about this, but I think there is a benefit to having something tied to a period of time for it being recognized, but there's also kind of, I feel like, a downside to like, okay, but what about the other months, or like the rest of the time that is spent? Is it not as important, or is it still equally as important, right? Where does that fit with that? Because I do think it's fair to recognize and promote those ideologies, but does it then belittle it when it's not at the front of the line or front of the stage? So not really sure, but nowadays, when it comes to diversity and culture and all that stuff, it's almost entirely a cultural battle now than a legal battle, and I think most people know that, or if you don't, now you do. And so, a lot of times morals you think would be a leading, argument in this, but morals are so subjective nowadays between people that they can be vastly different. What we view as moral and moral can be totally different, albeit on specific things, but still enough that it seemingly throws everything off. And so I don't think it can necessarily be approached from a moral perspective. I'm not sure what a good perspective is. I'm sure morals can play some part of it, and I think a lot of the times people are arguing on a moral behalf to sway the moral compass of the other person and kind of like reconfigure it, which is a strategy. I don't know how effective it is, but it's a certain strategy. But with Pride Month, right, you have the LGBTQ plus community and everything included in it, right? And these communities largely still have it rough, as despite what some people will say, because, for some reason, I think people just aren't accepting it, even though, I think a lot of people are still kind of scared and confused by it, which is fair to an extent because everyone's afraid of something new and something that is changing. But there are a lot of reasons why I don't think it's as bad, and why like the average person really shouldn't have a problem with it. One of the things, right, is like pronouns and stuff like that. People think it's like scary and confusing of like, oh, anyone can use like any pronouns type of stuff. And funny thing is, I also typically say you can use any pronouns for me because I really don't care, in my opinion, what you end up using. And the thing is, while I think the confusion and understanding, or rather lack of understanding comes from them thinking that anyone can use whatever pronouns they want, and it being confusing because they have to toss around between like a bunch of different people who they know who have these pronouns. One, there's not that many people who necessarily identify as that compared to the normal, quote unquote, normal or average person. Although, of course, there's a lot of, I think there's been like some research studies, I think, that show that people like overestimate how much of a minority there is in at least the United States for like who identifies as like, you know, part of the LGBTQ. They thought it was like 20 to 30% of the population or something, which was absolutely wild. It's not that big, so you're not really going to be meeting that many people, at least in real life, that are probably like that, unless you're, you know, specifically in that type of community, I guess, or seeking that type of community. So it's not like you're going to have to be remembering that much. And even so, there's like catch-all pronouns, right? One of the safest pronouns to use, which I haven't met anyone, I think, that has ever not allowed people to use they as a pronoun to refer to them. One, it's such an easy pronoun because we use it all the time, and we've used it when referring to singular people as well. So it's not like a super uncommon thing. We have multiple examples, right? Like you can say, are we still waiting on them? Oh, there they are. Or they are right over there, right? Those are all sentences where they, sure, it can refer to more than one person, but a lot of times in those sentences, it's just referring to one person, right? So it's not really that weird, I think, for people to use pronouns like that. And again, it kind of just goes back to everything seems kind of scary and confusing at first, but there's kind of a fun aspect to that, especially when it first becomes sort of mainstream. And I think, one, the community itself needs to be somewhat open to that fact, but, you know, there's also like this idea that, the people who are kind of embracing this, who are from the outside, like, you need to accept that it's kind of just how it is. There's not really any like crazy stuff. You don't have to study for a test of like pronouns or gender, right? Like, we're not testing you all the time. Hell, if you want, just use the person's name and there you'll avoid the person's pronouns. I've done that a few times, honestly. Typically I think I use they or the person's name if I know it. And I don't usually refer to people as pronouns because you'd only do that if they're not there, but if they're not there, I just refer to their name, right? So I don't know, that's kind of weird, but I don't actually use pronouns all that much, I think, even when talking about other people. But also goes to, Juneteenth, and it's going to kind of tie into that. The community itself, whatever minority community it is, violence can happen. I don't think there was any major violence that actually happened this month, at least that I was aware of, which could be seen as a good thing. But regardless, we're going to kind of talk about why it's not that crazy to think about. And it's because of really one simple thing. People can get tired and hurt. And when people are tired and hurting, they don't really believe the system can do enough for them to do anything else. So a lot of times they'll resort to violence, which is why when you see like the violent riots and stuff like that, which again, it's not necessarily violence against people, but against property, they're doing that because they're tired and they're hurt, and they've done everything else over the last couple of decades, and they still don't feel like it's enough to really do what they want. So it makes sense, and as much as people can be frustrated and annoyed and unhappy with the violence and whatever that they do from their protests and riots and stuff like that, and even how the news will portray it a lot as they'll give a lot of praise to quote-unquote nonviolent protests or civil protests, but if it's a violent at all, it's just immediately thrown into the garbage like the protest meant nothing. And I think that's a little ridiculous, because if it's violent, there's probably a reason for it, and you should investigate what that reason is. But of course, that's just what I'm saying. And so now we're going to easy transition to a completely different topic, which is the second topic of today's video. Streaming drama, yay. Yeah, internet always has drama, so of course we're going to talk a little bit about it. One of the first ones, though, is not the main one of this half of the show, I guess. But I thought it was interesting. There were a few VTubers, because again, I follow a few VTubers, and I kind of watch them from the outside, I guess. I don't interact with them all too much, but I see a lot of the stuff I think that goes on. And I think there was like a group of VTubers that got called out for, they did like a weird stream where they were going over terms that I think a lot of them ended up being the AAVE terms, which is the African American Vernacular English terms, I believe is what people called it. And so, as far as I'm aware, none of the people were black or had a good understanding of the African American terms or terminologies, and so they had like person who was like kind of fact checking it but wasn't super accurate. It was interesting to see what the perspectives were on that. I think there were a lot of interesting discussion points that were brought up in regards to it, and again, eventually led to some drama where the VTubers kind of apologized for it but then didn't really apologize for it, and some people got banned that shouldn't have gotten banned, and I don't know, it was a little bit of a mess. But I think that the VTubers should have apologized to the right people, because that was a little weird that they were very defensive about that, and I think they could have done a better job. But either way, very interesting. Again, there's not too much for me to speak on because, well, one, I'm not African American or black for that matter. I'm kind of curious, what do you think I am? Obviously, if you've actually seen me, because there is evidence of me online of like what I actually look like, then you already know, but or presumably you should already know. But if you haven't, like just based off on my voice alone, I'm kind of curious what you think I am. I feel like the answer is pretty obvious. I also feel like I've asked this before, but I don't know. I don't remember. But either way, I'm kind of interested to see what you guys think is the answer. And then really the big thing is Kick.com, right? Streaming and Kick.com. All the streaming drama seems to be coming from Kick.com right now. And that's fair. Kick.com is probably always going to be the biggest highlight. But one of the reasons really this month is that XQC moved to Kick. But it's a non-exclusive agreement, which I think you should take. Because if it's a non-exclusivity and they're giving you $100 million, like, yeah, you probably take it, especially when you're XQC and you probably don't care the most about morals. Like, I know people talk about the moral arguments for it, and we'll get to that as well, but he is not like a super moral following person, so at least not, I think, what a lot of people would consider morally. If he can do things that you shouldn't be able to do on a platform, he'll do them. And Kick.com allows him to do that, so he's going to go to that, especially if they offer him $100 million to do the things that he wants to do, even though he knows he can't on Twitch. So now he has this non-exclusive where he can stream on both, and then when he wants to do the things that he normally can't do, he just goes to Kick.com and does it there, like watch shows or watch movies with 50,000 plus people. It is a little scary that he's allowed to do that, and I don't really know why. I don't know. It's scary for the longevity of the platform. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with that, and that's one of the reasons I think people are a little scared about Kick in terms of like how good will it be in the long term, because it doesn't feel like it can last with the policies it has right now, because it's going to get into a lot of legal trouble if anyone really tries to sue, and a bunch of stuff like that. And of course there's been drama even, I think, with like people switching to Kick. Now, I think there's a little bit of disingenuous sayings or comments about it. People said like, oh, they're just, X person. I think like one of them like listed like Pokimane, or a few others that would like bully people for going to another platform. But the thing is, that's not actually true. It's just Kick. Because I can tell you right now, if someone announced, hell, if XQC announced that he was moving to YouTube for whatever reason, he would never do that, obviously, but if he did, don't think it would have the same drama. And the reason is because people have faith in the platform, and also people don't dislike the aspects of the source of the platform. And as much as it may be annoying to bring it up, as XQC I think finds it annoying, when people argue on that aspect, but it being tied and or linked to gambling and crypto scams, or just crypto gambling in general, maybe not scams, I don't know if any scams have happened that was linked to it, but just crypto gambling at all, yeah, it's not a great look, and people aren't going to like that. And another thing that's interesting, which I think is arguably a better point to come up with, or to argue against moving to Kick, is that Kick is very clearly, gambling is the forefront of it. If you go to the topics or the categories for streams right now, almost always, no matter what time of the day it is, gambling is going to be the biggest category, and followed by just chatting. But the thing is, like, why? And well, there's not a why, because we already know the reason why. But for people who want to move to Kick, unless they already went to do gambling, is it really a good idea for them to move in the first place, right? One of the fears that people had, even for some of the streamers that were moving to YouTube, is maintaining that community. It can be hard to maintain your community when the platform is a little bit different, and the platform, maybe prioritizes or boosts other categories. So if you're a gaming or music-based streamer, is moving to Kick, which promotes more gambling and just chatting, gonna help you? Are you going to be able to sustain your community, or are you gonna actually lose some of it? And so I think there's a reasonable amount of concern for going to Kick, knowing that gambling is the prominent front face of the page and website, essentially, because again, if you're not doing gambling, why are you there? Unless you get that $100 million contract, in which case, yeah, take me to any platform, I'll do that in a heartbeat, right? But otherwise, for the average person who isn't getting those contracts, why would they go to Kick if they don't want to gamble? Like, yeah, if I want to gamble and or do illegal activities, going to Kick is probably a pretty good option. Otherwise, I don't know. Sure, I might get the 95-5 split, but is it worth it if I don't have as big of a community as I could get on the other platforms that maybe will promote what I'm doing a bit more? I'm not sure. And again, the illegal activity part can be really scary for the future because, again, as I mentioned before, if companies start suing and all that stuff, I think it can lead to a lot of issues. But in the long term, I hope Kick turns into something good, but right now it feels like it's largely like toxic infested communities of edgy teenagers and adults. Again, some of the more popular streamers on that platform prior to the XQC switchover seemed very disgusting, and it didn't help people who I think viewed Kick as a bad platform. It kind of helps prove itself a lot with how much illegal and morally atrocious things happen between having Nazis and white supremacists on the platform, and these like ridiculous illegal things of watching movies, which again, it might not sound like, oh, that's not really illegal. Like, well, yeah, it is. It's literally copyright. You're streaming it to a bunch of people. I mean, they already had a thing where I think they streamed the Super Bowl back in February to like 50,000 plus, maybe even 100,000 plus. I don't remember what the number was, but it was a lot of people. And normally that's, pay-per-view stuff or whatever. You have to pay to watch it. They're breaking a lot of the policies of it, and it's kind of ridiculous. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, but hopefully everything goes well with it and that it turns into something good. Otherwise, I don't really care for it. And I think people who are against it have a reasonable case to be against it. So again, unless you want to gamble or do things that you normally couldn't get away with, which funny enough is, I believe, in line with what was it, Andrew Tate. That was the whole reason he wanted to go to like Romania or whatever, was to do things that he normally wouldn't be able to get away with. So if you have that same similar mindset, you can head over to kick.com. Your home will be waiting for you, and you'll be allowed to do all the things you wished you could do on all the other platforms. But with that said, that'll be around the end of this video. Hope you all enjoyed tuning in and watching my only up gameplay, which is probably really bad. I'm pre-recording this, so I actually have no idea how I'm doing. Maybe I actually beat the game before I finish this, but probably not, because I think this video is going to be around 20 minutes or so, and I can tell you right now, the world record is 23. I am nowhere close to that. But again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya!